For decades, we've had these blockbuster mega brands that have dominated the consumer product space. But with the rise of e-commerce and the democratization of unlimited shelf space with marketplaces like Amazon, the little guys and the little brands, they're winning. In this video, we break down the long tail of e-commerce, what it is, what it means for the future, and how you can capitalize on it. Let's go. What is up, guys? Welcome to Heist, the YouTube channel where we deep dive into topics related to e-commerce and selling on marketplaces like Amazon. And in today's video, I wanted to just break down the macro and micro shifts, really tectonic shifts that have taken place over the last 5 years that have really given rise to the domination and hyper growth of small direct-to-consumer e-commerce and Amazon FBA brands. And to understand how we got here, we can rewind the tape and just understand historically what it's meant to have a successful consumer products brand. So the name of the game back in the day before e-commerce really started to gain mass momentum was obviously brick and mortar retail. Now, one of the elements with physical brick and mortar retail is you literally have a finite amount of space depending on the store and or the number of stores throughout a country, right? So there's this dollar per square foot that's got to kind of get extracted from each of these physical locations. So you can't have unlimited hundreds or thousands of options for a particular product category. In fact, oftentimes there's a handful of core players that would dominate shelf space that mattered in a retail environment for that category. If you're lucky, maybe there would have been 5 or 10, but it was typically a handful. So those that could win the distribution game, that had relationships with buyers, that had economies of scale, that could get into that shelf space, get recurring POs, they were the winners. And because of the money involved, it tended to be these massive blockbuster brands that really owned consumer mindshare for those product categories. In this environment, another key element of success, in addition to just getting the eyeballs of people walking through stores, is you had to have massive paid media campaigns to get your brand known by consumers. And what this meant in places like groceries, you'd have these Procter & Gamble's that would dominate shelf space, or they would create these multi-brand strategies where they would have 4 or 5 different brands to target, say, dish soap as an example. And they'd harness that economies of scale, that shelf space, and they'd funnel that money into mass media campaigns. And as a result of this structure, it was incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to build up a brand, to get access to customers, to have the bankroll to even compete. And so this created a Megabrand Flywheel, where basically they had relationships with the buyers at these stores that secured shelf space across hundreds of locations, depending on the retailer. Obviously, that distribution in that shelf space, which was finite, led to sales that very few could capture. Those sales led to massive profits, and then those massive profits could then be dumped back into mass media campaigns to target millions and millions and millions of consumers with millions and millions of dollars. And then the flywheel would continue because of that success, because of that brand recognition, because of that advertising and profit. They would get more shelf space on more stores, and the self-fulfilling prophecy of this mega brand flywheel took hold. But there has been a tectonic shift over the last 5 years that has really disrupted this mega brand flywheel. And it's come in the form of massive adoption of e-commerce shopping. So those that are building these micro brands, either single operator or small team operators that focus on D2C e-commerce and or marketplaces like Amazon FBA, have started to disrupt that model and take a massive amount of market share away from these mega brands. And in October of 2004, Mark Andreessen, who's now a famous venture capitalist, but at the time was, I believe, the editor of Wired magazine, came out with an article called The Long Tail. And in this article, he talked mainly about media and entertainment. So people that were doing books, movies, songs, things like that, that because of this new digital catalog of media, smaller players could come and enter the market, and you wouldn't need to have those one-hit wonder blockbusters to find success with media and entertainment. Now, while Andreessen didn't really think of this in terms of consumer products per se, the model has really started to play out very much so in the physical products brand building environment. And historically, you'd have these mega brands that basically own everything, and they still exist, certainly. But the long tail, because of the limitless shelf space of e-commerce and platforms like Amazon.com, have totally transformed this such that there's so much choice and there's so much access to be able to steal market share from these larger players because of this massive distribution of the digital shelf. And this graphic just shows it, right? So while you've got these mega brands that still exist, they still dominate the handful of retailers that are still thriving, and they still make up a massive amount of money. money and have a massive marketing budget like they did before, but it's not the same as it used to be because this long tail of niche, hyper-focused, agile brands that have a totally different cost structure and strategy using the internet and e-commerce have really started to absorb a ton of mindshare and been able to stand up world-class brands and highly profitable businesses in a way that simply wasn't possible before. And the crazy thing about this long tail is you don't need mass media. So you don't need to run TV advertisements. You don't need to have multi-million dollar budgets, agencies of record to find success. You can use hyper-targeted advertising to meet customers as they're seeking information to purchase products like your own. And there's no finite shelf, meaning that because there isn't a limit on the dollar per square foot that needs to actually store the goods, there's not the same moat and there's not the same limit on having access to customers seeking particular product categories. And Amazon FBA and the Amazon Marketplace channel has disrupted this in a massive, massive way with their logistical infrastructure, with their warehousing, and their ability to present almost limitless choices to customers shopping on the platform. Equally important, the eyeballs of customers are accessed not because of retail shopping and people actually walking through a store. They're gained through things like earned media, like social media. They're gained by people that understand the algorithm and being able to access organic searches and shoppers. And most importantly, these organic impressions do not require a physical store environment anymore. So access to those eyeballs, those impressions, those sale opportunities have been completely democratized and open up to both small and little players in the space. Not only that, but the economics of these long tail niche players are wildly different than their mega brand competitors of old. They don't need big office buildings and corporate leases. They don't need to finance warehousing and other capital infrastructure to store and distribute their goods. They don't need manufacturing equipment. They don't need massive paid media budgets to access millions of customers with TV, radio, billboards, etc. They don't need massive staff and teams. And then finally, because of the wide open global supply chain, access to world-class factories, low factory costs, efficient and inexpensive transportation, and a lower landed cost of goods sold to end consumers is all possible because of the internet. So the million-dollar question, or potentially multi-million-dollar question, is how do you, us, and we take advantage of this long tail niche opportunity that's been created in the e-commerce landscape? Well, really there's 5 things to keep in mind to really take advantage of this tectonic shift. One of the massive advantages of this long tail environment is the fact that you can access customers' eyeballs, impressions, and potential purchasers of your product by understanding algorithms and understanding recommendation engines. No longer is it a buyer at a brick and mortar retail store that decides what customers see and what they have access to. It's now literally a computer algorithm that's taking a bunch of different variables and understanding what customers are searching for and presenting the right offer to the right customer at the right moment in time. So understanding these algorithmic recommendations, how it comes together in an e-commerce environment, whether that's Google, whether that's paid ads, is going to give you a massive, massive advantage where you can punch above your weight against these mega brands. The second thing that you can do is to leverage these cost structure advantages that these traditional consumer brands simply don't have. So you don't have the massive staff, you don't have the infrastructure costs, you don't have to have all these massive agencies, millions of dollars in broad ad spend. But more importantly, because of the retail structure where you don't have that middleman markup that has to go through wholesale pricing to end retailers, you often have a price point that is at least 30% less, if not 50% less or more than these mega brands. So you can present a more compelling price offer to customers, and you've got a more nimble and cost-effective structure to grow and scale your brands on things that matter, like getting impressions, getting an audience, and creating a world-class product inexpensively. The third thing you can do in this new long tail environment is to basically have creative arbitrage. No longer do you need to have these massive photo shoots, models from California, creative agencies on record that you pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions a year to. Using open creative marketplaces, you have access to world-class talent and creative capabilities that weren't possible before. Not only that, because of the rise of the influencer class, content creation through influencers is also something that is incredibly inexpensive compared to what these traditional mega brands need to create. In a similar breath, how do you access customers and get impressions? Really, there's three different ways you can do this typically. One is through owned media, which are things like your website, your own social accounts, etc. One is earned media, PR, people sharing your content, influencers sharing your content. And then the third is paid media, which traditionally used to be commercials, but now is much more intent-based pay-per-click advertising. So harnessing these three different versions of media, but more so focusing on owned and earned media, which really don't cost the same as the paid media structures, you can really punch above your weight, access customers, build an audience much less expensively than you could if you had to focus on the traditional mass paid media that mega brands need to. And the fifth and final thing that you can do to optimize for the long tail of e-commerce is to understand and take advantage of the digital shelf, which is ultimately limitless. Focus on niche opportunities. Build your brand by winning the algorithm and winning that organic shelf space that exists on Google and that exists on marketplaces like Amazon. Developing products and offers that will find customers at the right moment, in the right place, providing them exactly what they need. That's it for this week, guys. A quick nitty-gritty one, breaking down the future of commerce, the future of consumer goods, and the future of brand building, which now exists in the long tail. If you like this one and this is your first time here, be sure to hit subscribe, like it if you like the video, comment down below if you've got some thoughts. Stop by next week because we drop videos on a weekly basis, but in the interim, check out this video that the YouTube algorithm thinks you're gonna like.